So from Billboard, we have seemingly reached the end of a nearly decade-long legal drama between the pop star Kesha and music producer Dr. Luke. Recently, the parties announced that they had settled a lawsuit in which Luke accused Kesha of defaming him when she accused him of a rape in 2005. So to understand that case, you have to go back about 10 years from in 2014 when Kesha unsuccessfully sued Dr. Luke to get out of her exclusive recording agreement with his production company and had alleged in that legal complaint that Luke drugged and raped her at that party. And so then that case was not successful for Kesha. There was summary judgment motions and a lot of legal procedural stuff. Then later on, Dr. Luke sued Kesha for defamation for the allegation that he raped her. And the settlement, which just happened earlier this month, came after an appeals court held that Dr. Luke was a public figure and thus would have a higher burden of proof to meet his defamation case. So it was a lot of back and forth. This was a decades-long process, as you know, Elisa, from just following this news. It led to just pretty much completely derailing Kesha's career. I think she only put out one album in that whole period of time that I think she was working while this lawsuit was going on. And it just, it significantly affected the careers of everybody involved. And I do want to show the statements that were made, right? So once the settlement was announced, Kesha and Luke put up statements about, where they stood. This was probably everything about these statements, by the way, scream like this was jointly and heavily negotiated. A lot of legal wrangling went into these statements. So do you want to read them out for us? Because I actually have it on very small print on my screen. And so I'm going to
sure.
I have to get right up on my screen to read it.
Yeah, sure. So in resolution of the lawsuit, both Kesha and Dr. Luke are posting both of these statements on each of their accounts. Right. So Kesha's statement says, "Only God knows what happened that night. As I've always said, I cannot recount everything that happened. I'm looking forward to closing the door on this chapter of my life and beginning a new one. I wish nothing but peace to all parties involved." That's Kesha. And then Dr. Luke's statement, "While I appreciate Kesha again acknowledging that she cannot recount what happened that night in 2005, I am absolutely certain that nothing happened. I never drugged or assaulted her and would never do that to anyone. For the sake of my family, I have vigorously fought to clear my name for nearly 10 years. It is time for me to put this difficult matter behind me and move on with my life. I wish Kesha well."
So everything about those statements, those look heavily lawyered, we can say. And I'm guessing that and obviously both sides had to sign off on each other's statements. And reading between the lines here, it was pretty clear that Luke was only going to allow a form of statement from Kesha in which she did not definitively say this is what happened, right? Mm-hmm. I think as far as he would let the statement go from her was, I don't, I'm not exactly sure, and that's and he vociferously denied it in his statement, and that was what was negotiated to basically end this whole drama. And I think the only there are no winners in this. This sucks for so many reasons, and I don't, I could not definitively tell you what happened, or, the only two people who would have an idea of what happened are the two litigants. And so the only perspective that I want to offer in a case like this, and it's the same perspective that I've been, standing on my soapbox about for 10 years, is this. If you find this whole saga frustrating and annoying and hurtful and triggering and all of the other negative things that this whole situation is, one place that I want you to look to for blame, and there are obviously many things about this that are terrible, but I look at this through the prism of an entertainment lawyer who fights for indie creators. And so one of the places that I think was problematic in all of this, and perhaps was the impetus to a lot of this, was the exclusive recording agreement. So we don't know what happened in that case, but what we can all say with some amount of certainty is that the relationship between Kesha and Luke at some point became toxic, became a situation where these two people should not be working together anymore. And Unfortunately, they had the only legal relationship to each other that I can think of that does not let two people who don't want to work together stop working together anymore. And because an exclusive recording agreement says, Kesha, you can work with me and only me. Any music you make as a recording artist has to be produced by me, has to be released by me through the label that I negotiate. So you can either work with me or you are done in show business. And so if the relationship gets toxic, there's no way for these two to stop working together. Now, contrast that with pretty much every other legal relationship where these two people could have existed, right? Like, let's say Dr. Luke was an employer and Kesha was an employee. The law provides a mechanism for them to stop working together. Kesha can fire her. Or sorry, Dr. Luke can fire her. Kesha can quit. Let's say Kesha and Dr. Luke were business partners who ran a company together. The law provides a mechanism for that relationship to end when things get toxic. Every state's corporate law has a long, drawn-out procedure for how you wind up a corporation and everyone goes their separate ways. You know what doesn't have that? Exclusive recording agreements, where if the relationship gets toxic, tough. You have to work with this person you don't want to work with who might be an abuser, or you don't work anymore and you're in breach of contract. If you don't like how this turned out, lay some of your blame to the legal mechanism that allows it to exist. And for the other indie creators out there that are listening to this, give your own thought to whether or not you would want to embark in an agreement that would force you to work with somebody that you might not want to work with anymore because things might get toxic and you might get stuck in the deal anyway.
Like, power dynamics in the music industry are awful enough, especially for women, especially on down the line through every possible prism of intersectionality you can think of. And then the legal system decides to throw a helping hand to the sort of hegemonic, generalized abusive kind of power that still tends to run the music industry as a whole. And I cannot even imagine something as powerful as music, your own kind of like cathartic art, and then you have to be forced to make it with this person or else you cannot have success with your art. It is absolutely unconscionable, and hey, Legal Beagle, how is this allowed?
Even under the best of circumstances, like as a music fan, all right, what frustrates me about an exclusive recording agreement, whether it's an exclusive record deal or one of these kind of production deals where an artist has a deal with a production company or a producer like Kesha had with Luke here, what ultimately makes these deals frustrating as a music fan is that even if the whole arrangement goes perfectly well, right, even if these two people work together like just peanut butter and chocolate, just everything is firing on all cylinders, it still sucks for music fans because you still don't get as much art as you would have otherwise gotten had the agreement been non-exclusive, because she can only work with this producer. Dr. Luke can work with other people, right? Dr. Luke can work with all the artists that Dr. Luke wants to work with. Kesha gets one producer to work with. And so if she vibes with another producer and thinks she can make something great with them, she's not allowed to work with them. And so think of all the other art that Kesha could have made during this time had she not been in an exclusive relationship. Even if the relationship was going really, really well with Luke, she still would have been able to make more work and collaborate more with the creator in a non-exclusive recording relationship. And in today's industry, where collaboration, working with others, cross-pollinating with other creators is sort of the essence of what we're encouraging people to do on this program on a weekly basis, the idea of only getting to work with one producer or one record company, so antiquated.
I have the option to divorce my co-writer.
Isn't that wild in itself? In America, it is easier to get out of a marriage than it is to get out of an exclusive recording agreement. Like, we have all these laws about how divorce happens.
This is a really good question from the chat. H2O Happy Dude asks, what about saving your music and or content until the contract expires? I don't think they have that kind of option. You can't just sit on stuff.
That is an excellent question, H2O Happy Dude. And the reason, because you'd think that makes a lot of sense, but the reason why that doesn't work is that most exclusive recording agreements are not based on a time limit. You can't run out the clock. Instead, it's based on a number of albums, 3-album deal, 5-album deal. And the problem with that is who decides when you release an album, the label or the producer. So if you want to keep an artist stuck in a deal forever, just don't make any albums with them. And they can't make any albums with anybody else. And so they're just done in the music business. You know, I mean, and in California, they try to address this a little bit by saying that a personal service contract, such as a record deal, has a 7-year time limit. And I think Kesha tried to use that a little bit in one of the cases, 10 years ago. But there are so many problems with that California rule with respect to record deals. We've talked about that on previous shows, that it doesn't really work. But yeah, you can't run out the clock on a bad record deal because there is no clock. It's based on the number of albums you make. And ultimately, the person with whom you have that exclusive relationship is controlling when the albums get made.
Yeah. And it is like, thinking about Kesha and Dr. Luke, these are two incredibly high profile folks. Imagine all of the Keshas out there that maybe don't necessarily get this shot in court and have the resources to be able to take folks to court and get out of these situations. And it is so easy. I'm looking back when I was like 15, 16 years old and trying to shop my stuff to record executives, and how lascivious some of the looks that I would get were. And, you know, even music industry, gaming industry, same thing. And the idea of being a young artist and trying to get your music out there and having that hope, it is so difficult to imagine anyone at any age with that kind of dream not accepting something that could take them so far without realizing the wild power dynamic inherent in it. And it's a cautionary tale for sure, not just to sort of like read your contracts and but have your circle strong and have a really good support system that can help you navigate these still shark infested waters. Because for every Kesha that can get a settlement, there are probably hundreds, thousands of others going through similar experiences that don't get this kind of relief.
And it's so upsetting to think that relative to what other artists might be going through in this space, because Kesha's not the only story like this, she's just the one that we're hearing right now because of how famous she is, that she's the happy ending here.
Yeah.
That, you know, like she's the best case scenario in this toxic relationship where, you know, her career is significantly derailed. It's, you know, it's going to be adversely affected in ways that, you know, are probably impossible to calculate. The amount of art and opportunities to create that she's lost, the amount of money that she's lost, the amount of acclaim that she has lost, and just the physical and psychological trauma that she went to. And she's the best case scenario for this is a deeply troubling thought. And you speak of the notion of, you know, get a lawyer, get people to protect you, don't walk into these deals. And I'm telling you, as a lawyer who looks at these record deals all the time and wrote a whole book about why exclusive recording agreements suck, even I'm telling you that, you know, the best entertainment lawyer in the world isn't going to make a bad record deal a good record deal. Because as long as the word exclusive is in that record deal, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the terms are. As long as there is a clause in there that says you can create with me and only me, that is inherently a crappy legal document, no matter how well a lawyer works their legal alchemy to make the rest of the contract better. That's why I've always said in my, God, how long have I been doing this now? More than 10 years of practice. That's a scary thought. I have yet to meet an exclusive recording agreement that I would ever advise a client to sign. I've read terrible ones. I've read relatively good ones by like the standards of this terrible industry. And I've never met one that I would say to a client, yeah, that's a good idea to sign that. And there are many reasons why. Top of the list, because the word exclusive is in it.
It's wild, but it's like when you got those stars in your eyes, It's hard. And then of course, if, you know, Dr. Luke is a huge producer, right? Yeah. And so depending on who it is that maybe you get to work with to create your music, that, you know, that could be like, oh, well, this isn't going to go bad. Sure, I'd love to work with you forever. That doesn't matter. I'm sure, maybe, you know, maybe sometimes you think like, oh, this is something that can be revisited later or something, because I am the kind of person who definitely, you know, trying to draw those boundaries a lot better now. Thank you, therapy. But when you're trying to do something, it is so easy to look at a contract and be like, oh, but that'll be fine. Oh, that won't apply to me. That's like a boilerplate thing. And like, we have like a good relationship. It's so easy to gloss over things because you want it to work. You want everything to succeed. But
and they'll tell you, and they'll tell you every tactic in the book, right? So many of these really bad producer deals it's always like a 2-page document, right? And it always says, this is just the short form document. The parties intend to draft a longer agreement. And you know what? The longer agreement never comes. What happens is they give the artist the short form agreement and you go, hey, this looks pretty bad. And my uncle, who's a lawyer, says it's pretty bad too. And the producer always says, look, don't worry about it. Look, we just need to get this thing signed so we can get started. And then when we have more time, you and I, we're going to sit down and really bang this contract out and make it fair and put everything that you need to have in there. But we just need this signed so that we have it in the drawer. We're never going to look at it again. Don't worry. And, you know, and then that, of course, that 2-page agreement winds up being the only agreement, and it's a terrible agreement and it ruins lives. And, you know, I don't know if you were co-hosting when I had told this story, but I was actually in a restaurant in Aventura, sitting across this, it's like a hip hop artist, you know, this young woman who was audibly sobbing across the table from me in this crowded restaurant, because she was telling me the story about how she was stuck in this producer deal with this like acclaimed hip hop producer and she couldn't get out. Meanwhile, everybody in this restaurant's like, who is this a-hole who's breaking up with this beautiful person? You know, like, what is this jerk doing? Damn. Breaking up with her in a crowded restaurant? And no, she was just trying to, like, I'd met her because somebody asked me to talk to her about her contract, and it was just a terrible contract. Here's the other thing about these producer deals that suck, since we're kind of on this tangent now, is the main difference between the exclusive recording agreement, like the traditional major label record deal, and the, you know, producer deal, is not the fact that they're both, you know, because they're both exclusive, right? They're both, you know, the label deal says you can work with me and only me as a label. The producer deal says you can work with me and only me as a producer. But the big difference is the major label deal, at least that usually comes with a big advance, right? If you know, I mean, sometimes not so much in modern days, but at least traditionally, right? There's like a 5 or a 6-figure advance. So it's like, yeah, you can work with us, but at least here's a really nice engagement ring that we're going to give you in the form of like a 6-figure advance. The producer deal never comes with the advance. If it does, it's a small advance, because it's just, look, I'm locking you up and you're not getting anything in exchange from me except for the privilege of working with me, producer, if I decide I want to work with you. Because I might decide a few months in that I don't want to work with you anymore, and then I'm just going to keep you stuck in this deal, which happens a lot, right? Like, you sign, you know, producer signs artist to like 3-album, 4-album deal, makes one song with them, puts it out on SoundCloud. If nobody bites, if a major label isn't interested, if there's no traction, they're done. They're off to the next artist. Meanwhile, you're still stuck in that exclusive deal with a producer that doesn't want to work with you anymore.